Hello, class. So tonight I am interviewing George, who is a veteran of the Vietnam War, which we are currently working on. And I thought this would be a great way to introduce you to a part of the war that many people don't really know about. And George will be here to tell us everything that he knows through the questions I'll be asking him. So, George, can you just please give us a brief introduction of who you are? And yeah,
Sure. Well, I'm a retired Army veteran. I'll be 84 next month. I spent 20 years in the Army. I got drafted. I never planned to join or stay in, but somehow that happened. I remember as a student, the age of your students, seeing old timers walking around with their World War II caps on. And it seems like I blinked my eyes and now I'm one of those guys wearing a Vietnam cap. So I have a lot of thoughts, and as I mentioned, I'm writing my memoir right now, which I'll share with you next month when it's published. That is inspired by my year in Vietnam. I was a forward observer there, forward artillery observer, and what that is I would speak to uh, forward air controllers to adjust artillery, naval gunfire, and airstrikes against the enemy when it was requested. So I think that's a little bit about me. What else can I tell you about that war?
so you mentioned that you were drafted into the war, which is probably the most famous war that used the draft. So, how old were you when you drafted, and what was your life like at the time before you got notified about being drafted?
Yeah, well, I was 22. I'm not a very good student. I wasn't at that time, so I flunked out of my second college, and that is why I was eligible for the draft. So some people don't know, but 70% of us who were on the front lines were conscripted draftees, not volunteers. So my life back then was I wasn't very happy with myself because I had flunked out of college and trying to make everybody proud of me. My dad was in the Army. We both got drafted and ended up as privates going to Officer Candidate School, OCS. And he ended up making three-star general. And I retired as lieutenant colonel after 20. I had had enough. But he and I actually served in Vietnam at the same time.
So, how did it feel like when you got the notification that both you and your father were going off to war? How would that have felt like for your mother?
Yeah, it was disbelief. It didn't seem real. I couldn't come to grips or grasp that I was actually going to go to a war like the wars I read about with Hemingway in the library and where people killed each other. It just didn't register. I couldn't bring myself to believe it. But it was true, and soon enough I was on an airplane headed over there.
So, between the drafting, the announcing on TV and radio, and you hopping on that plane, how were you able to prepare your mind and your body to go off to this war and to boot camp?
Well, at that age, I didn't really know that much about the world. I trusted the senior leadership, the government, that they were informed and wanted to do the right thing, and that the war was for freedom and winning the hearts and minds of the people. I was wrong about all that. Um, but at the time, I didn't know. And by the time I got to Vietnam, it was too late. Um, so I was pretty naive and
Can you,
unprepared.
yeah, can you describe the moment that it really sunk in for you that you are now actually going to war and that there might be a chance you could lose your life?
Yeah, it came pretty fast. Um, like a week after I arrived, I was assigned to an armed helicopter unit in the First Cavalry Division, and they accounted for half of the enemy casualties in the entire division, and they had the highest casualty rate. So in my memoir, I described my first week, my first helicopter ride, and during that ride, um, I had never been on that kind of helicopter before. I had never fired a machine gun before. Now I was going to be manning one. I had no idea how to operate it. And the next thing I knew, our two helicopters were flying into the Anlo Valley looking for the enemy. And we found them. I mean, the very first, I forget if it was exactly my first day, but it was my first week or two. But the pilot saw a bunch of Viet Cong running up the trail, and he said, "Fighter Red rolling in hot." And in we went, firing our rockets and killing these people. They went down like someone had hit them with an invisible hand, and there was blood on the trail, and I was firing my machine gun and not quite believing that it was me doing that. And strangely enough, what I found that during that encounter and others, I had a strange sense of calm. It would come over me like I was an observer watching myself do these crazy things. Um, so on that same flight, after we had attacked those people on the ground, we flew up the valley further and we saw this guy in a rice paddy. And he was like hoeing just kind of fooling around in the rice paddy with his hoe and looking up. And there wasn't supposed to be any people in that valley because all the residents had been evacuated and it was a free fire zone. So anybody there was supposed to be the enemy. So the lead helicopter of the two of us landed in the rice paddy, and the door gunner jumped out with his 45 to take this guy prisoner. And all of a sudden, I saw the water jumping up all around the helicopter on the ground. And I couldn't, first I didn't know why, because the helicopter rotor noise uh, um, blanked out it was gunfire from the village. There were people in the village shooting at the helicopter. Then I realized that it was gunfire, and the door gunner went over in the rice paddy on his face, and the helicopter took off and had to leave him there. And so my pilot said again, "Fighter Red rolling in hot," and in we go with our rockets firing, and the pilot had told me earlier, "Don't fire your machine gun unless we tell you because you don't really know how to use it." And so now we're getting shot at, and he's yelling at me, why aren't you shooting your machine gun?" And I told him, "You told me not to." He said, "Shoot it, God damn it, shoot it." So I started firing, and just as I did, wham, a bullet came through the floor, right by my boot and out by my head. Um, and it was like someone had punched me in the head. So now the pilot, I've never fired, I fired three artillery missions on a camp stool at Fort Sill on the range in training. And so now it was time to fire my fourth artillery mission and it was in combat. So I call back to the artillery battery, fire mission grid 236-738 machine guns fire and adjust fire over. And the first round comes screaming in, and I see where it lands. And so I adjust fire and put fire into the village. And the blue reaction team, which was like a 10-man reaction force, had been alerted, and now they were flying up the valley, and they landed in that rice paddy where I've been firing the artillery to rescue the door gunner. And it turned out that he had played dead. He wasn't hurt. He wasn't hurt. He had played dead the whole time. And so they rescued him, and then they said, put more artillery on there, Greek. My nickname was the Greek over there. And so I fired probably another 100 rounds, 1,000 pounds of high explosive into the village. And then it started getting dark, and so we went back to the LZ. And that night, we had a briefing, and the colonel who was commanding the troop talked about what had happened and so forth. And um, after the briefing, I went back and laid down to sleep and was trying to figure out what happened during the day. And I was looking for some feelings about the fact that I probably killed some people, and I really couldn't detect any emotions. It was like trying to find a filling in your teeth and, probing around with your tongue. How do I feel about this? And so, I was exhausted and finally fell asleep. So this is all the first week. And the next day, the colonel told us to fly back there. So I, myself and the Captain Evans in a H-13, that's a little bubble helicopter like on MASH. Uh, I joined him and we flew back to the village. And they wanted me to put an artillery trap on the village, and then they were going to put the blues in again and see what enemy had been there. So I fired another a couple of 100 rounds on the village. It was more artillery than I ever fired. It was more artillery than I'd ever seen. Um, and so now we can see the blue helicopters coming up the valley. And so my pilot said, "Let's go down and see what we got, Greek." And I'm thinking, why are we going down there? Why can't we just stay up here? So he flies down, and as soon as we get like telephone pole height, I saw a Vietnamese soldier with a rifle running across the village, and he said, "Shoot him." So I shot him, and the tracers came out so fast. I didn't know. I'd never fired an M16 automatic before, and the entire 20 rounds come out in 3 seconds. So I didn't understand why my rifle wouldn't fire anymore, and I'm trying to figure out should I reload, what's going on, and this other Vietnamese soldier on the ground jumps up with his AK-47 and fires 20 rounds into our helicopter. And blood and glass are going all around the helicopter. I have blood on myself, and I don't know if it's my blood or what. I look over and the pilot has been shot in the neck. And this is like my first week. And he's saying, how bad does it look, Greek? And I'm saying, well, not too bad, sir. How do you feel? Are you getting dizzy? Because he was bleeding, but it wasn't like from an artery or something. It was just a little bit of blood coming down the front of him. So he managed to get control of a helicopter, and we went back up, and I fired some more artillery on there. And then the blues came in, and it turned out that we had killed them all with the artillery, and it was a sapper platoon headed by a woman major. And one of the artillery rounds had gone through her bunker and killed them all. And so we headed back to the base, and my pilot is still bleeding, and I'm saying, "How do you feel?" And he's saying, "I'm a little dizzy," and I'm saying, "Well, hang in there." And I'm not a religious guy, but I got to say I was saying a couple prayers on the way back that he would make it, and we did make it back. And they took him off in a helicopter to the hospital. It turned out that it wasn't a bullet; it was a piece of the helicopter glass that was in his throat that had happened to him. But I'm thinking, I've been in Vietnam for a week now. I don't know how I'm going to make another 365 days. But so that was my first experience, first combat experience, my first week in Vietnam.
Now, apart from the fighting, which we always see in the movies, how can you describe a average day outside of the fighting of how you kept yourself busy and how you were able to just clear your mind from what was going on around you?
Well, you never really, in Vietnam, there was no front lines. The enemy could be anywhere. And so you were never really there. I mean, there were a lot of days when it was just miserable, walking in 100-degree heat through the rice paddies in the jungle and waiting for someone to shoot at you. Uh, but the funny thing was that I never expected to be killed. I knew that I might get killed tomorrow, but not today. The birds are chirping, the jungle's beautiful. I'm not going to get killed today. So at the whole time I was there, and especially during the fights, it just seemed unreal. It was like a movie I was watching or something. Um, Even looking back now, it's almost like a movie that I saw. I can't picture I'm more afraid now than I was then, I think, when I'm thinking about it. So somehow you can insulate yourself from what's going on. I mean, I guess we can get used to any circumstance. The human race is just made that way. I mean, some people didn't. I was fortunate, I guess, that I was able to deal with it. I often wondered how I would deal with it, and it turned out that I was capable of dealing with it, and especially during the battles, I would feel calm and almost like a third person watching what was going on.
So you mentioned in your first week, there were opportunities where you killed people, that killed the enemy. Um, how what was the hardest thing to adjust to now being a soldier in a war zone from being a civilian, where if you killed someone on the street, you would go to jail for life?
Yeah, it's funny. Everything is relative. Your new reality soon takes over, and when I was a kid, we used to go hunting once in a while, but I never liked it that much. But we went hunting for rabbits one day, and we shot one, and the rabbit was screaming like a person, and it horrified me. So I didn't know how I could possibly go shoot people in the war. But it turns out when they're trying to shoot me, that I didn't think too much about shooting back. Uh, I don't know. Like I said, it all just seemed unreal. Uh, Even when I had my friends dying right next to me, uh, I had some kind of, I don't know, um, armor that would come over me to protect me from the horror of the whole thing. And so I was able to kind of encapsulate that and put it in a different place in my brain. Um, Not everybody could do that. I mean, I remember we had one young man that came in. He was there just 2 days, and his friend was killed, and he was catatonic, laying in the trail with his in the fetal position, and just no longer able to function. But it's horrible that the human race can do that to each other. And that sense of horror never left me, even though it didn't incapacitate me.
Recently, finished rewatching Band of Brothers, and one of the most emotional episodes, outside of the one discovering the concentration camp, is them
Uh-huh.
in Bastogne seeing their best friends literally die feet in front of them. And some of those men were pulled off from the front line because they weren't human beings anymore. They weren't functioning as well as the other soldiers just by seeing their best friends get killed.
I'm
So
surprised it
were
didn't
there
happen more.
were there friendships that developed with you among the soldiers, and were they able to help you get through that terrible experience?
Yeah, I had a couple of good friends that went to officer candidate school with me that came over there with me but yeah, and so the humor helps a lot, you know. We just having a dry sense of humor is for example, we got back on break after about 6 months to the base camp, and the base camp they had a small officers club, a little wooden thing, but they had lines of bottles lined up inside there where a guy could go in there and get drunk. So the captain gave us the night off, which would happen like once or twice the whole year. And so we went to that club, and it was locked up. And so we could see the bottles inside, but we couldn't get through the door. And so I said, Shaq, what should we do, And he said, well, let's break the lock. And I said, well, what if they catch us? And Shaq over says, well, what are they going to do? Send us to Vietnam? So, so that kind of humor. And also, when he and I were on the plane going over, we were looking at this Playboy magazine, and there was a joke in the magazine about this old guy on the bed um, that was dying, and he's telling his friend, "Come closer, come closer, come closer." And so his friend keeps coming closer, and he gets down and leans over, and the guy on the bed slaps him and says, "Last tag," and then he dies. So our joke was, if one of us got wounded badly, we would call the other on the radio and say, "Last tag." So that actually happened. Shackelford got shot in the back, and he called me on the radio and said, "Last tag." But he went off to Japan, and Shackelford, my best buddy over there, my wingman, he got 3 silver stars, a couple purple, got wounded 3 times, And but when he came back, I said, "What happened? He said, "Well, I was hiding behind a tree." I said, "Well, how did you get shot?" He said, "I was on the wrong side of the tree." You know, so, so I mean that kind of, I mean, you just have you become accustomed to a totally different, I don't know what you would call it, totally different scenario or state of being. Uh, and coming back home, which is what the second half of my book is about, you bring that home with you and try to adjust to life again back in peacetime, and that's a bit of a challenge. And describing the war and then describing coming home is what my memoir is about that will be finished next month.
How did this war change you as a person once you left Vietnam and were permanently in America?
Yeah. Well, uh, it started me on a spiritual search, actually, as to why we're here, why the human race is here, why mankind can do that kind of thing. I mean, men can shoot each other. And so I came back quite changed from that. And even though I may not have shown it much on the outside, it still occupied my mind for the rest of my life. And trying to come to grips with that, um, in my book, I kind of call it "What's Real?" You're trying to figure out what's real about this life. And so life is a journey, and that was a pretty violent stop in my journey that made me think about why we were here and what we should do and why mankind can't get together and get along and how we're just a few, chromosomes um, apart from chimpanzees, and we don't act too much different than they do, I mean, except they don't have nuclear bombs. So, so that, I mean, it changed me in many ways. And I asked myself, what if I had to do over? What, you know, I wouldn't go if I knew back then what I know now. But I also tell myself I wouldn't understand what I understand about the human race and human behavior if I hadn't gone, and I wouldn't know what evil really was. And so learning about that and about how mankind treats each other, I think that I got lessons over there that I couldn't have got anywhere else. Uh, and so for that, I'm grateful because you can't fool me anymore. I mean, uh, it's like fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So people, when they talk about wars today and why we fight them, and the slogans that we're fighting for freedom and to save the hearts and minds of the people. That's all bullshit. We don't fight wars for freedom. We're used by politicians and by ego-driven people that are cruel and evil. And so now that I know that, I can't be fooled anymore. And that's one of the reasons I'm writing my memoir, because I want people to understand that. So even today, it's just, with what we have going on here in the USA with Trump and various wars that we still fight, nobody can fool me anymore. They're wrong and they're cruel. And I honor the valor and the courage of the soldiers, but I don't honor the wars. The wars are wrong.
Now, to end off tonight, I would like to ask, what do you wish people understood about the young men who were drafted into Vietnam? Because
Mm,
many people vilify the boys who
yeah.
went to Vietnam because they hate the war. And
Mm.
so, what's your opinion on what do people need to understand about you and the other young men who were forced to go fight against the North
Yeah,
Vietnamese?
we were used. We were cruelly used, and we weren't old enough. And it wasn't a moral decision. You got your letter in the mail, and you didn't really know where you were going or what you were going to do, and all of a sudden there you were. We didn't really have much say. A few people were brave enough to be conscientious objectors, like Ali, the boxer, was very brave in not going. But very few, well, actually, quite a few people stood up and voiced their moral objections to it. But a lot of us were young and we just didn't know any better. So. I'll say this, we were more concerned about the Vietnamese and being kind to to prisoners that we took, for example, than they were to us. Um, there were very few, I mean, the American soldiers were mostly kind-hearted. The Cali incident was an isolated incident. Uh, we weren't there to kill anybody. We used to call it search and evade. We just wanted to stay alive and get to go home again. So were we wrong in going? Yeah, we were wrong in going. Did we have a choice? Not much. We did have a choice, but it's choice in retrospect. So I would say be kind in your thoughts to those of us who suffered through that war, being too young to know what we were being put into, and be aware today of how that same cycle is repeating itself. Even, people are mad at Jane Fonda for her stance going over there to Hanoi. And I'm not even mad at her. You know, it's not, she wasn't the villains. The politicians were the villains. We had no business going over there in the first place. That war was manufactured. The Gulf of Tonkin was a made-up crisis. You know, it, there are no good wars.
And so, thank you very, very much, George, for giving me the honor to interview you and let you talk about the experience you had in this Vietnam War. And I really hope that the learners will learn from this and understand the topic a lot more than just by reading a textbook.
Yeah, I hope so too. And thanks for the opportunity to meet with and tell you about that. And I'll send you a copy of the book when it's published next month.
Thank you very much.